Dad emptied my college fund to pay for my sister's gambling debts. Mom said Kevin needs it more than you. When I visited the bank to close my account, the manager pulled me aside and whispered, "You need to see this." My parents never expected what happened next. The envelope arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in late August, 3 weeks before I was supposed to start my freshman year at Georgetown University. I'd worked toward this moment since middle school, maintaining a 4.22 GPA while juggling student council debate team and weekend shifts at the local bookstore. Getting accepted to Georgetown had felt like vindication for every late night spent studying, while my older brother Kevin partied his way through community college before dropping out entirely. My hand shook as I opened the letter from the financial aid office. The message was brief and devastating. My expected family contribution hadn't been received, and without immediate payment, my enrollment would be canceled. I read it 3 times before the words fully registered. I found Mom in the kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner with mechanical precision. She didn't look up when I entered. "Mom, Georgetown says the tuition payment never went through. The money from my college fund should have transferred last week." The knife stilled against the cutting board. She set it down slowly, wiping her hands on her apron before finally meeting my eyes. The guilt written across her face told me everything before she opened her mouth. "Honey, we need to talk. Your father and I made a difficult decision." My stomach dropped. What decision? Kevin got into some trouble. Serious trouble. He owes money to some very dangerous people, and if we didn't help him... She trailed off, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. "How much trouble?" $47,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $47,000. My entire college fund built up over 18 years through birthday gifts from my grandparents' summer job savings and the monthly deposits my parents had promised since I was born. "He gambled it away, didn't he?" My voice came out flat, emotionless. Mom's silence confirmed what I already knew. Kevin had always had a problem with betting on sports poker games, scratch tickets. It had started small during high school and escalated once he turned 21 and could access casinos legally. My parents had bailed him out twice before smaller amounts they described as loans that were never repaid. "Where's Dad?" "He's at work, sweetheart. Listen, we'll figure something out. You can take a gap year, apply for more scholarships, maybe start at a community college like Kevin did." Kevin dropped out after one semester, I interrupted. "I'm not Kevin. I know you're upset, but family comes first. Kevin needs this money more than you need Georgetown right now. There are other schools, other opportunities." The casual dismissal of everything I'd worked for ignited something cold and furious in my chest. "Kevin needs it more than you." The words echoed in my head as I walked away from her, grabbed my car keys, and drove to Riverside National Bank. Mr. Patterson had managed the branch for as long as I could remember. He'd been the one to help me open my first savings account when I was 7, depositing the $20 bill my grandfather had given me for my birthday. He recognized me immediately when I approached his desk. "Miss Brennan, what brings you in today?" "I need to close my college fund account." Something flickered across his face, a mixture of concern and what looked like recognition. He glanced around the bank before lowering his voice. "Before we proceed with that, could you step into my office for a moment? There's something you need to see." Confused, I followed him into the small glass-walled room. He closed the door and pulled something up on his computer screen, angling it so I could see. Transaction records filled the monitor dating back several months. "I shouldn't be showing you this, but I've known you since you were a little girl, and what's happening here isn't right." His finger traced down the list. "These withdrawals started in March. 5,000 here, 3,000 there, another 7,000 in June. Someone's been systematically draining this account for months." Monica scanned the dates and amounts. March 15th, April 2nd, May 20th, June, 8th July, 3rd August, 11th. The final withdrawal, made just 4 days ago, had taken the remaining balance down to 0. But I never authorized any of these. The account required my signature for withdrawals over $500. Mr. Patterson pulled out a folder and slid it across his desk. Inside were withdrawal slips, each one bearing a signature that looked remarkably like mine, but wasn't. The forgery was good, but I could spot the differences in certain letters, the way the M and the B looped differently than my natural handwriting. "Your father made these withdrawals. He's listed as a joint account holder since you were a minor when it was opened, which technically gave him legal access. However, the bank's policy requires notification to the primary account holder for withdrawals exceeding $1,000. Those notifications should have gone to the email address on file." "I never received any notifications." He clicked through several screens. "The email was changed in February. Does this address belong to you? He pointed to an email I'd never seen before, a generic Gmail account that definitely wasn't mine. The methodical deception was somehow worse than the theft itself. This wasn't a desperate act made in a moment of crisis. My father had been planning this for months, carefully siphoning away my future in increments designed to go unnoticed until it was too late. Can I get copies of all these records? Absolutely. I'll print everything right now. Mr. Patterson busied himself with the printer while I sat frozen staring at the evidence of my parents' betrayal. Miss Brennan, I'm truly sorry. If there's anything else I can do. Actually, there is. I need to know about my options regarding fraud and forgery. His expression turned sympathetic but serious. Given that your father was technically a joint account holder, criminal prosecution would be difficult. However, you could pursue civil action for the forged signatures and unauthorized email change. I'd recommend consulting with an attorney. I left the bank with a manila envelope full of documentation and a clarity of purpose I'd never experienced before. My phone buzzed with texts from Mom asking where I'd gone, saying we needed to talk more, insisting I was being dramatic. I ignored them all. Sitting in my car in the bank parking lot, I pulled up my college acceptance letter on my phone. Georgetown had been my dream since sophomore year, when my history teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had talked about her own experience studying there. She described the cobblestone streets of the campus, the rigorous academic environment, the opportunities to intern at embassies and international organizations right there in Washington, D.C. I'd researched every program, attended virtual information sessions, spent months perfecting my application essay about wanting to bridge cultural divides through diplomacy. The acceptance had come in March, a thick envelope that made my hands shake when I pulled it from the mailbox. Mom had cried happy tears. Dad had actually hugged me, something he rarely did. Kevin had mumbled congratulations before going back to his phone. I felt like everything was finally falling into place, years of sacrifice and hard work paying off in one perfect moment. Now that moment felt poisoned by the knowledge that even then, Dad had already started draining my account. He'd hugged me, knowing he was stealing my future. The cruelty of it was staggering. I scrolled through my texts, finding the group chat with my two closest friends from high school, Amy and Jenna. They'd both left for college 2 weeks ago. Amy to a state school 4 hours north, Jenna to a small liberal arts college in Vermont. I'd been counting down the days until I could join them in that new phase of life. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. What would I even say? My parents stole my college fund from my gambling addict brother felt too raw, too humiliating. They'd wonder why I hadn't noticed sooner, why I hadn't been checking the account regularly. I trusted my parents completely, never imagining I needed to verify they were keeping their promises. Instead of texting, I opened my banking app and transferred every dollar from my personal savings account at Riverside National to a new account I opened at First Commerce Bank across town. It wasn't much, around $3,000 from the bookstore and some birthday money, but it was mine, and I wasn't risking it. The law office of Patricia Winters was located in a brick building downtown. I'd found her through a quick internet search for family law attorney and called from the parking lot. She'd had a cancellation and agreed to see me immediately. Ms. Winters was a woman in her mid-50s with sharp eyes and an efficient manner. She listened without interrupting as I laid out the entire situation, spreading the bank documents across her conference table. What you're describing is a clear breach of fiduciary duty regardless of the joint account status, she said. The forged signatures and unauthorized email changes demonstrate intentional deception. The challenge is proving damages beyond the monetary loss, and of course pursuing litigation against your parents is a significant decision. I understand, but I need to know my options. She outlined several possibilities. We could send a formal demand letter requiring repayment within 30 days. We could file a civil lawsuit for the full amount plus damages. We could report the forgery to the police, though she agreed with Mr. Patterson that criminal prosecution would be complicated by the joint account status. There's another angle to consider, Ms. Winters said, leaning back in her chair. You mentioned your brother owes money to dangerous people. If your parents use these funds to pay off illegal gambling debts, there may be additional legal implications. At minimum, we could subpoena records of where that money actually went. The consultation lasted 90 minutes. By the end, I'd signed a retainer agreement and authorized Ms. Winters to draft a demand letter. The fee would take a significant chunk of my savings from the bookstore, but I didn't care. This wasn't about the money anymore. I drove home as sunset painted the sky orange and purple. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. I found both parents waiting at the table, Mom's eyes red from crying. Dad's expression, stony. Where have you been? He demanded. Your mother's been worried sick. At the bank, then meeting with my attorney. Dad's face flushed red. Your attorney, don't be ridiculous, Monica. You're 18 years old. You don't need an attorney. I do when someone forges my signature on bank documents and steals $47,000 from my college fund. The color drained from his face. Mom made a small sound of distress. That money was for family. I had every right to access that account. You had legal access. You didn't have the right to forge my signature, change my email address without permission, and systematically drain an account meant for my education. I pulled out copies of the withdrawal slips and placed them on the table. These signatures aren't mine. You committed fraud. I'm your father. I made a judgment call about what was best for this family. No, you chose Kevin over me again, just like you chose him when he wrecked your car and you bought him a new one while I had to save for mine. Just like you chose him when he got arrested for drunk driving and you paid for his lawyer while telling me I'd have to take out loans for college. Just like you've chosen him every single time. He screwed up his entire life. Mom was crying openly now. Monica, please. We can work this out as a family. You destroyed my future for his gambling debts. You don't get to lecture me about family. Dad stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. You're being selfish and dramatic. Kevin was in real danger. Those people would have hurt him. Then Kevin should have faced the consequences of his choices. Instead, you made sure I'd face them for him. We'll pay you back, Mom pleaded. Give us time and we'll replace every penny. You've had 18 years. You promised that money was mine, that it was sacred, that nothing would touch it except my education. Your promises mean nothing. I picked up the documents. My attorney is sending a formal demand letter. You have 30 days to return the full amount plus interest. If you don't, we're filing a lawsuit. Dad's laugh was harsh and bitter. You'd sue your own parents after everything we've done for you. You mean after everything you've done for Kevin, I'm finished being the responsible one who gets punished for it. I walked upstairs to my room and started packing. I've been saving money from the bookstore in a separate account they didn't know about. Enough for first and last month's rent on a small apartment. Georgetown was probably lost, but I could enroll at the state university, take out loans, work full-time while studying. It would be harder than the path I'd planned, but it would be mine. My phone rang as I was filling my second suitcase. Kevin's name flashed on the screen. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity won out. Monica, what the hell, he said. Mom just called crying about lawyers and lawsuits. You're really going to destroy this family over money. I'm not destroying anything. Dad did that when he stole from me to cover your gambling debts. I didn't ask him to do that. I was handling it. Handling it how? By borrowing more money you couldn't pay back. By making more bets to try to win it back. Silence answered me. That's what I thought. Look, I know I messed up. I'm getting help now, going to meetings, but suing Mom and Dad isn't going to solve anything. It's going to get my money back. That solves my immediate problem. They don't have $47,000 just lying around Monica. If you win a lawsuit, they'll lose the house. The revelation should have made me feel guilty. Instead, I felt nothing but a distant sense of justice. They'd been willing to sacrifice my future without hesitation. Now they might face consequences of their own. They should have thought about that before they committed fraud. Jesus, you sound like a robot. When did you become so cold? When I realized my parents loved you more than they loved my dreams. I hung up before he could respond and finish packing. Mom tried to stop me on my way out, grabbing my arm and begging me to reconsider, to think about what I was doing to the family. Dad just watched from the doorway, his expression unreadable. I'll be staying with the friend I lied, not wanting them to know about the apartment. My attorney will be in touch. The efficiency apartment I'd found was small and sparsely furnished, but it was mine. I spent that first night sitting on the floor, eating takeout Chinese food and researching my options. State University had rolling admissions. I could start in January if I couldn't make the fall semester work. There were scholarships I hadn't applied for because I thought Georgetown was certain. There were paths forward, just different ones than I'd imagined. My phone rang at 9 p.m., an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. Is this Monica Brennan? A woman's voice asked, professional and cautious. Yes, who's this? My name is Linda Hartley. I'm a financial counselor at Georgetown University. I received a rather distressing call from your mother this afternoon. My stomach tightened. What did she say? She explained there had been a family emergency that impacted your ability to pay tuition. She was quite upset and asked if there were any emergency funds or additional financial aid you might qualify for. Linda paused. However, some of what she said didn't quite add up, so I pulled your file. Your application showed significant financial resources. What happened? The genuine concern in her voice broke something loose inside me. I found myself explaining everything. The gambling debts, the forged signatures, the systematic theft over months. Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. Linda sighed heavily. That's not a family emergency. That's financial abuse. Unfortunately, our emergency aid funds are quite limited and typically reserved for unexpected medical situations or natural disasters. I'm documenting this conversation in your file, but I have to be honest with you. Your enrollment will be automatically canceled on September 30th if payment isn't received. I wish I could do more. I understand. Thank you for trying. After we hung up, I stared at my phone for a long moment before setting it aside. Georgetown was gone. I needed to accept that and move forward. Ms. Winters called the next morning. The demand letter will go out today via certified mail. I've also been doing some research into your brother's situation. Do you know who he owed this money to? Not specifically, just that my parents call them dangerous people. I have a contact in law enforcement who might be interested in that information. If your parents' money went to pay off illegal gambling operations, that could open additional avenues for recovery. Would you be comfortable with me making some inquiries? Do whatever you need to do. The legal fees were adding up faster than I'd anticipated. Ms. Winters had quoted me a retainer of $2,500 with additional hourly fees, depending on how complex the case became. I'd given her $1,500 from my savings with a promise of more once I got paid from the bookstore. It meant my emergency fund was nearly depleted, but I couldn't back down now. September 30th came and went. My Georgetown enrollment was officially canceled. I spent that evening in my apartment, allowing myself one night to grieve the loss of that particular dream before forcing myself to move forward. The state university application was already submitted. I just had to wait. 3 days later, my parents' attorney responded to the demand letter. They were willing to negotiate a payment plan acknowledging the debt, but claiming they couldn't pay the full amount immediately. Ms. Winters advised against accepting anything less than the full sum with interest. Payment plans from family members rarely work out, she explained. They make a few payments, then stop, and you're back to square one, except now they've established partial repayment, which can complicate litigation. We push for full payment, or we file suit. I authorized her to reject the payment plan offer. The lawsuit was filed on September 15th. Mom called 17 times that day. I didn't answer. The state university accepted my late application for spring semester. I registered for a full course load and picked up additional hours at the bookstore. My supervisor, Mrs. Chen, had always been kind to me, and when I explained my situation in vague terms, she gave me more responsibility and a small raise. You're one of the hardest workers I've ever had, she said. Whatever you're going through, you're going to come out stronger on the other side. I wanted to believe her. Some days, the anger kept me moving forward, fueling late-night study sessions and double shifts. Other days, the loss felt overwhelming, not just of Georgetown, but of the family I thought I had. Those were the days I had to remind myself that the family I'd imagined had never really existed. I'd been viewing my childhood through a distorted lens, remembering the good moments while minimizing the countless times I'd been sidelined for Kevin's drama. The months between September and January blurred together in a haze of work and preparation. I took the state university placement exams in October and scored high enough to earn 12 transfer credits, which meant I'd be entering as a second semester freshman rather than starting completely from scratch. Small victories, but I'd learned to appreciate them. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for late October. Ms. Winters warned me it would be difficult facing my parents across a courtroom. She wasn't wrong. Mom looked like she'd aged 10 years, her hair newly streaked with gray. Dad's jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle jumping. Kevin sat behind them in the gallery, staring at me with undisguised resentment. I'd prepared myself for this moment, or thought I had. I'd practiced keeping my expression neutral in the mirror, rehearsed my testimony until I could recite it without emotion. But seeing them in person dressed in their Sunday best like they were going to church instead of court made my chest constrict. Mom had worn the pearl necklace I'd given her for Mother's Day 3 years ago, bought with money from my first paycheck at the bookstore. The sight of it felt like a calculated move, a visual reminder of our relationship meant to make me feel guilty. Dad wore his navy suit, the one he'd worn to my high school graduation, when he told me how proud he was of my accomplishments. The bailiff called the court to order, and I forced myself to look straight ahead rather than at my family. Ms. Winters had coached me on this. Maintain composure. Don't let them see you rattled. Remember that emotion isn't evidence. The judge reviewed the evidence methodically. The forged signatures were particularly damaging, especially combined with the unauthorized email change. My parents' attorney argued that the joint account status gave my father broad authority over the funds, but the judge seemed skeptical. The court recognizes that joint accounts are complicated in family situations, Judge Morrison said, peering over her reading glasses. However, the evidence of forged signatures and unauthorized changes to account notifications suggests a deliberate attempt to conceal these transactions from the primary account holder. That moves this beyond a simple dispute about account access into potential fraud territory. We broke for lunch before the next phase of testimony. I sat alone in the courthouse cafeteria, pushing a sad-looking sandwich around my plate. A shadow fell across the table. Mind if I sit? It was Kevin. I shrugged, too tired to argue. He sat down heavily, looking almost as exhausted as I felt. They might lose the house, he said, without preamble. Their attorney says if the judgment goes against them, they'll have to sell to pay you back. I know. And you're okay with that? Are you okay with the fact that they destroyed my future for you? I met his eyes. Honest question, Kevin. If the roles were reversed, if they took your money to pay for something I needed, would you be as understanding as they expect me to be? He looked away. Probably not. There's your answer. I'm in therapy now. Real therapy. Not just the gambling addiction meetings. Trying to figure out why I keep sabotaging myself. He laughed bitterly. My therapist says I might have been acting out because I never felt like I measured up to you. Straight A student model child, everyone's favorite. Meanwhile, I was the screw-up who couldn't do anything right. So you gambled away $47,000 to prove what exactly? That you really are a screw-up. I didn't mean for it to get that bad. It never feels like it's getting that bad until suddenly it is. And you're in so deep you can't see a way out. He rubbed his face tiredly. I told Dad not to take your money. I said I'd figure something else out, but he insisted. Said family takes care of family. Said you'd understand eventually. Well, I don't understand, and I won't. I know, I just wanted you to know that I tried to stop them, for whatever that's worth. It's worth nothing, Kevin. You could have gotten a job. You could have declared bankruptcy. You could have faced the consequences instead of letting them destroy my future to save you from yours. He nodded slowly and stood up. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I am. I watched him walk away and felt nothing. Maybe I'd become the cold robot he'd accused me of being, or maybe I'd just finally learned to protect myself. The hearing resumed. Ms. Winters called Mr. Patterson as a witness to authenticate the bank records and explain the policy violations. His testimony was damning, laying out in precise detail how my father had systematically circumvented normal procedures designed to protect account holders. My parents' attorney called character witnesses, neighbors, and family friends who testified about what good people they were, how devoted to their children, how this was just an unfortunate misunderstanding blown out of proportion. I sat through it all with my hands folded in my lap, maintaining the same neutral expression I'd practiced in the mirror. When it was my turn to testify, Ms. Winters walked me through the timeline, finding the letter from Georgetown, confronting my mother, discovering the forged signatures, the months of planning my father had undertaken to systematically drain the account without my knowledge. Miss Brennan, can you tell the court about your academic record? Ms. Winters asked. I recited the facts. A 4.22 GPA, National Honor Society president, debate team captain, volunteer work at the library, a partial academic scholarship to Georgetown covering half tuition with my college fund meant to cover the rest, plans to study international relations and eventually work in diplomacy or foreign service. And what are your plans now? I'm enrolled at State University starting in January. I'm working full-time to save money for tuition since I'll need to take out loans. I'll still study international relations, but the networking opportunities and internship programs at Georgetown were unique. I've lost access to those connections and that prestige, which will impact my future career prospects in a field where reputation and connections matter significantly. The cross-examination was brutal. My parents' attorney painted me as spoiled and entitled, a privileged child throwing a tantrum because she didn't get her way. He implied I was exaggerating the impact on my future, that State University was perfectly fine, that I was being vindictive and cruel toward the parents who'd raised and loved me. Isn't it true, Miss Brennan, that your parents have supported you your entire life? Provided food, shelter, clothing, education? Yes. And isn't it true that they were facing a crisis situation when they accessed these funds, that your brother's life was potentially in danger. My brother's life was in danger because of choices he made. That doesn't give my parents the right to destroy my future to fix his mistakes. So you value money over family. I value honesty and integrity. My parents lied to me for months. They forged my signature. They deliberately concealed their actions because they knew what they were doing was wrong. This isn't about money. It's about broken trust and stolen opportunities. Judge Morrison called for a brief recess. When we reconvened, Judge Morrison delivered her preliminary ruling. This court finds the evidence of forged signatures and unauthorized account changes to be clear and convincing. While joint account holders do have broad access to funds, that access does not extend to fraud and forgery. The defendant's arguments about family emergency and good intentions do not negate the improper means used to access these funds. She looked directly at my father. Mr. Brennan, you had legal alternatives. You could have asked your daughter directly. You could have taken out a loan. Instead, you chose deception, and that choice has consequences. She ordered my parents to repay the full $47,000 plus interest and court costs within 90 days. If they failed to pay, their assets would be subject to seizure and forced sale. Mom collapsed into tears. Dad sat rigid and silent. Kevin stared at the floor. I felt nothing but a distant satisfaction, like watching a movie where the ending was predictable but still gratifying. Outside the courthouse, Ms. Winters shook my hand. You did well in there. I know this wasn't easy. What happens now? We wait to see if they comply with the judgment. If they don't, we begin asset seizure proceedings. Given their financial situation, they'll likely need to sell the house or take out a significant loan against it. And if they do neither, then the court can force the sale. We'll cross that bridge if we come to it. She paused, looking at me carefully. There's also the matter of my remaining fees. The retainer covered the initial work, but the hearing and judgment preparation ran over. You owe another $1,800. I nodded, my stomach sinking. Between the legal fees and living expenses, my savings were completely gone. I'd have to put in extra hours at the bookstore and pray nothing unexpected came up before I could rebuild my emergency fund. 2 weeks passed with no word from my parents or their attorney. Then a certified letter arrived. Inside was a cashier's check for the full amount plus interest, along with a brief formal note stating that the matter was settled and requesting I sign a release confirming full satisfaction of the judgment. I stared at the check for a long time before depositing it via mobile app. Ms. Winters reviewed the release form and confirmed it was standard before I signed. Just like that, it was over. The same day the check cleared, I paid Ms. Winters the remaining $1,800 I owed her. Then I transferred $45,000 into a high-yield savings account earmarked specifically for tuition. The remaining amount covered my living expenses and gave me a small buffer for emergencies. After months of financial anxiety, having that security felt surreal. Except it wasn't really over. My parents had taken out a second mortgage to pay the judgment. They called it my inheritance, claimed I'd taken my future share of their estate early and shouldn't expect anything else when they died. I told them I didn't want anything else from them now or ever. Kevin went to rehab, a court-ordered program, after getting arrested again for running an illegal poker game. Mom sent me updates I never asked for, pleading letters begging me to forgive them, to understand they'd been desperate and afraid. Dad sent nothing. I threw myself into preparing for spring semester. The money from the judgment went into a new account at a different bank, one where no one else had access under any circumstances. I used it to pay tuition in full for my first year and put the rest into a high-yield savings account. Starting classes in January felt like emerging from a long tunnel into daylight. The campus was bigger and less prestigious than Georgetown, but my professors were engaged and challenging. I joined the Model United Nations team and started building new connections, different opportunities. It wasn't the path I'd planned, but it was mine, earned through my own resilience, rather than inherited through family money and broken promises. 3 months into the semester, I got an email from the Georgetown admissions office. They'd heard about my situation through Linda Hartley, who'd apparently kept my file active and advocated on my behalf to the scholarship committee. Georgetown was offering me a full scholarship for the following fall, including housing and a generous stipend for expenses if I wanted to transfer. I sat in my dorm room reading and rereading the email. A year ago, this would have been everything I wanted. The dream recovered, the future restored. But I'd built something new in the ashes of that old dream. I had friends here, professors who knew my name, a campus job in the International Studies Department, a research project on diplomatic relations in Southeast Asia with Dr. Chen. Starting over at Georgetown meant leaving all of that behind, proving that I could still achieve the prestigious path despite my family's sabotage. I didn't need to prove anything anymore. I wrote back thanking them for the incredible offer, but explaining that I'd found my place at State University and wanted to see where this path led. The decision felt right in a way that had nothing to do with pride or revenge and everything to do with choosing myself on my own terms. The last time I saw my parents was at my grandmother's funeral that summer. We were polite and distant like acquaintances who'd once known each other better. Kevin was there with his new girlfriend, looking healthier than I'd seen him in years. He'd been sober for 6 months and was working as a manager at a sporting goods store. "You look good," he said during the reception. "Happy," I said. "I am." "You too." "I'm trying. One day at a time, like they say." He hesitated. "For what it's worth, you were right to do what you did. I needed to face consequences, and they needed to learn they couldn't keep enabling me. I didn't do it to teach anyone a lesson. I did it because it was my money and my future. I know, but it worked out that way anyway. Funny how that happens. We didn't exchange numbers or promises to stay in touch. Some bridges burn for good reason, and that's okay." I graduated some years later with a degree in international relations and a minor in economics. My thesis on economic sanctions and diplomatic negotiations earned departmental honors and was published in an undergraduate research journal. I'd secured an internship with the State Department for after graduation working in the Bureau of Economic and Business Affairs. Mom sent a card congratulating me. Dad didn't. I wore my cap and gown alone, sitting with friends I'd made during my time at State University. The family I'd chosen, rather than the one I'd been born into. The internship turned into a job offer. 2 years after graduation, I was working as a junior analyst in Washington, D.C., living in a tiny apartment in Arlington and building the career I'd always wanted. It looked different than I'd imagined at 18, the path more winding and the timeline delayed, but the destination was the same. I never reconciled with my parents. Sometimes people ask if I regret, that if I wish I'd been more forgiving, if family is worth more than money. I tell them the truth. It was never about the money. It was about the lying, the betrayal, the casual dismissal of my dreams to enable my brother's self-destruction. Some things you forgive, and some things you simply survive and move past. Years later, working late in my office at the State Department, I'd sometimes think about that August afternoon when everything fell apart. The girl I'd been so certain of her path and devastated by its destruction. I wished I could tell her that she'd survived this, that she'd built something better from the wreckage, that the strength required to stand up for herself would serve her better than any Ivy League degree. But maybe she already knew. Maybe that's why she walked into the bank that day instead of accepting what she'd been told was inevitable. Maybe that's why she hired an attorney and filed a lawsuit and refused to back down when everyone told her she was wrong. Maybe she'd always had the strength. She just needed a reason to use it. The college fund my parents stole bought me more than an education. It bought me the knowledge that I could survive betrayal, stand up for myself, and build a life on my own terms. That lesson was worth more than any tuition payment could ever be.